The flavor of Franciacorta, again, drives me right to it every single time. I think it's just a really elegant, I don't want to compare it to champagne because I believe that they should be all judged according to their own standards. But of course, it is in that direction, in that it's dry. The bubbles are really fine. The flavor is really elegant and perfect. And the Glera grape to me has a little bit of sweetness that I find a little less palatable than the grape Vicks that's being used for Franciacorta.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 53. The holidays are fast approaching, so are you looking for some new wines to give as gifts? Or maybe to treat yourself? I am. How about some lesser-known wines like raw or natural sherry from Spain? Then there's Franciacorta, the Italian sparkling wine that's less well-known and quite different from Prosecco. And finally, how about Pisco? The grape-based distilled spirit from Chile or Peru that makes the perfect holiday cocktail. Well, in today's episode, we're going to discover all of those delicious festive wines, and we're chatting with Christine Sismondo, a professor of English literature at York University in Toronto, and she writes about wine and spirits for the Globe and Mail, Canada's largest national newspaper. She's also written regularly for the Toronto Star, the Report on Business Magazine, and The Grid, and has won a National Magazine Award for her work. She's the author of Mondo Cocktail, A Shaken and Stirred History, and wrote a 6-part podcast series for Wondery's American History Tellers based on the book. Her most recent book is America Walks Into a Bar, A Spirited History of Taverns and Saloons, Speakeasies and Grog Shops. I love that. Published by Oxford University Press. I'll put links to Christine's website, her books, and social media handles in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/53. So, if you haven't had a chance to watch my brand new online video class called The 5 Wine and Food Pairing Mistakes That Can Ruin Your Dinner and How to Fix Them Forever, please save your spot today at nataliemclean.com/class. It is so much fun. This class is free, and you'll also learn about my new in-depth paid course called the Wine Smart Course, a full-bodied framework to taste, pair, and buy wines like a pro. Also in the free, so why not category, is my Ultimate Food and Wine Pairing Guide. If you want a copy, just email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know what you like about the podcast and or what I can do to improve it for you. All right, on with the show with Christine Sismondo, who joined me from her home in Toronto. Hello, Christine Sismondo.
Hi, how are you?
Great, thanks, Christine. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Thanks for having me.
So many questions to ask you, Christine, but I want to kick it off with, what was it like at the family dinner table while you were growing up? What was happening? What was on the table? Who was there?
That's interesting. I actually grew up in Ottawa in the Westboro neighborhood. I don't know exactly how far that is from you.
I live in Westboro.
Come on, really?
Really? Yes. But anyway, carry on. This is weird. I mean, in a good way.
Really weird.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Anyhow, my father, though, is an Italian, and he grew up in Argentina. And when we were living in Westboro, there was a real shortage of things that he really wanted to eat and drink all the time. Because before that, we were actually in New Brunswick. And if he was having trouble in Ottawa, imagine the trouble he was having in New Brunswick. So he would sort of do his best to source things out from the Byward Market and places like that. But really, we had to make a lot of our own stuff. We had a garden plot. We grew a lot of our own eggplant, zucchini, and my parents even made their own wine for a while. Not very good wine, I'll tell you, but wine nonetheless. So I had an early sort of glimpse into the life I wanted to lead.
Oh, wow. So you tasted wine as a child then and grew up with it?
Yeah, I think we had wine, not a whole lot. I wouldn't have had very much when I was a kid. I think I probably didn't even really like the taste of it when I was young. I think that was sort of self-enforcing, but I don't recall it being really restrictive.
So where did you get your taste for wine and other beverages, alcoholic? How did that happen?
Well, I think it just seemed to me like a normal part of eating growing up. I mean, my dad, sort of an old school Latin American now, in Argentina, he'll drink a little glass of wine with his lunch and still does, right? I know that I kind of look at it and think, well, it's way too early for that. But that's just the way that it was more like food.
Right, exactly. And you wrote a piece for the Globe Mail on the Catena family.
That's
Wonderful
impressive.
wines. Yeah, so she's so impressive. She's an emergency room doctor in her spare time. She's vice president of the family winery. What was your focus there? What was the story there on the Catenas?
Well, in some ways, because I've always written a lot about spirits as well as wines, and I kind of write more about spirits and drink more wine is kind of the way it tends to go. And my parents have always been really big, especially my dad, about trying to get me into wine and to like wine so much. And I love it, but the culture of it, I've never really connected with. But at Catena, I could not believe the experience that I got there in terms of understanding the soil structure and the difference that it made to the different wines. And we got to go through the vineyards and try the stones and bones, the two Chardonnays. They're really just like 14 feet away from each other, but because they've dug down and seen which soils are rocky and which ones are sandy, they can tell that they're going to taste this much difference. And then you taste them, they're right in the fields, and you're like, wow, I have seen the light. You're right.
Wow. Yeah, she is a scientist by nature. I mean, not just a doctor, but like her father, who also has a doctorate or doctor, they study the soils almost pebble by pebble and are doing these small lots and everything else. I mean, it's just amazing what they've done as a family for viticulture in Argentina.
It's really impressive. And I couldn't believe really how visual it was because you can actually look down and see all the different types of soils. I was really blown away by that.
That's fantastic. Moving on then, Christine, you've highlighted for me some of your favorite wine stories that you wrote in the Globe and Mail. Let's start with the sparkling wines from Italy that we don't know. We all know about Prosecco and, of course, Champagne from France. But what is one of the two sparkling wines that we don't know about so much from Italy?
It's really interesting because I think that a lot of people believe that Cava is what you call champagne from Spain and Prosecco is what you call champagne. I mean, I realize it's not champagne from Italy. And of course, it's not because these are highly regional places with big differences between how they make things from one region to the next and with huge grape varietal differences. The two that I wrote about are Lambrusco and Franciacorta, but of course, there are others as well. Those happen also to be my two favorite.
Okay, let's start with Lambrusca, which had a very nasty reputation back in the, I guess, 60s or 70s. Why was that?
Yeah, if you talk to people of a certain age and they can remember when it went out, then they are not eager to have that ever again. And then you have to tell them, no, it's really a different Lambrusco than what you were drinking because we have sort of more good stuff coming over. But in the late 70s and early 1980s, if you look at the top 10 best-selling wines in the United States, there's a New York Times list on it. I think it's something like 4 or 6 of them are Lambruscos. So it was this wildly popular wine among Americans, sort of all throughout the 70s and early 1980s. Not all of it was that good, though.
No. Yes, you hesitate. Why wasn't it good? Like, what did it taste like and why was it not that great?
Well, I think the predominant feature would be just that it was really too sweet for the large part. There's so many different types of Lambrusco now, as there were then and before that. But the one that was coming over to North America was sold for $2 a bottle, which is, of course, more, it's not $2 chuck exactly. It's better than that. But it was really an affordable price point for baby boomers who were just starting to learn how to drink wine. But it was sweet, it was syrupy, it was made generally in Charmat tanks, which is a large scale method of doing the secondary fermentation. And it was really just not a great quality. It would have tasted a little like a grape pop.
Like a soda pop, like sweet cherry pop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because
So
it is a red sparkling wine, right?
Oh, yes. I should have said that right off the
That's
top. A lot of people are really turned off by that, even now. I know I told my sister in law, you got to go get this Lambrusco. It's at the LCBO right now. I always sort of send out alerts when I see things that I love.
Oh.
And she got there and then she said, oh, it's the red. And she walked away from it, didn't buy it. And then she came over to my house another time later and she tried it and she was like, oh, I was so wrong. I should have bought this.
Excellent. Good case study. And it's festive. So I think on the holidays, during the holidays, we should try a red sparkler. I mean, what the hey? Sparkling Shiraz is in that category, at least color wise, but very, very different production methods. So you said the Charmat method. That is kind of like in a big tank, the second fermentation, versus in champagne, it's the second fermentation that gets the bubbles. It happens in the bottle, right?
Exactly. And the thing that made Lambrusco the wine of that era had a lot to do with the fact that there was this collective of winemakers who got together in Italy. And this is after the country has been devastated by war. They're in a total depression. Everybody is absolutely flat broke, but everybody is sort of looking for how are we going to embrace this post-war age? So they pooled together, they formed collectives, and they invested in technology for creating the wine and then also for marketing it and for storage. And together, this group of wine producers, they united, and that's what riuniti means in English, is united. And they pooled their resources and they made this wine. And then they marketed it to the United States, and it did fantastically well.
So they dialed up the sugar. They had an easy production method, low cost of production. Did they do anything else? How did they market it so that it got such great penetration into the market here?
They were really smart about it. First of all, I think that they tweaked the flavor profile of Lambrusco so that it would be sweet for very young people who were just learning to like wine. So people didn't have to deal with a very challenging palate. And second of all, they went to TV and they advertised it on TV. And they actually used the tune from, I think it was a Howdy Doody intro. And then they sort of superimposed these words. I can't remember exactly what they are now. I'm sorry. But if anyone ever wants to, they can contact me and I'll find the exact lyrics because they're fantastic. So it was a very young adult, poppy, upbeat sort of song that would remind people of their childhood watching Howdy Doody. And that was the advertising campaign at first.
Wow, that's like Ratatouille. All the memories go back to childhood, and it's that connecting memory that sets off the whole series of associations.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So how did the Lambrusca then evolve? So it had this foothold in the 60s and 70s. Then I would assume it fell out of favor being sweet. But what's happened to the method, to the style, and why is it making a comeback now?
I mean, I think that there's probably riuniti being sold in a lot of places still, but in the sort of more rarefied wine circles, nobody is really going to buy that at this point. But there are a number of producers who have abandoned the Charmat tanks and they've gone back to the older methods from before, and they're doing a secondary fermentation in the bottle. It costs a little bit more than the $2 chuck, of course, but there's such a wide range of these fresh and delicious wines that you can have. I've never tasted quite the range of flavors in anything other than Lambrusco because there's everything from the palest pink. You could almost mistake it for a Brut Rosé, a Cava perhaps, all the way over to this really thick and grapey, sort of foamy, something that could be like a lambic beer. It's just a huge range of things going on.
Wow, that is diverse. So with Lambrusca, It's now more modern, more diverse. You were saying in your article, there's just so many grapes that are used, so many yeasts. I mean, how do we keep track of it all? It sounds a little intimidating for what used to be a simple drink, now very modern in style and a sommelier darling. It sounds a little
Mhm.
intimidating, is it?
Well, I guess you could if you wanted to catalog everything. I'm not really methodical in my approach to wine in that I don't keep track. I don't have, a notebook with scores or anything like that. I just drink it. So,
Uh-huh.
and if things are fantastic, then I remember them and I remember sort of the general story. And then I don't worry about being intimidated by things. And the great thing about Lambrusco in terms of the intimidation factor is that they're really meant to be unpretentious. Drink them now, drink them up like immediately. Even a lot of them have a metal cap instead of a full cork. There's a little bit of a range on terms of how they're packaged, but they're meant to be the kind of wine you stick under your arm and you go on the picnic and you just pop it open and drink it. It's a drinker, not a thinker, I guess is the
Oh,
word
I
of
like that.
it,
There's a good
right?
tagline. Someone
Yeah.
should use that. That's great. All right. Let's talk about the other Italian sparkling that you've written about in the Globe Mail. And that is, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but Franciacorta.
I call it Franciacorta, but you might be right. I'm not really 100% positive. My dad did not teach me enough Italian.
Oh, well, that's okay. You well made up for that deficit in your education. Maybe differentiate Franciacorta from Lambrusco and from Prosecco. Like, let's situate it. What is it like and how is it different?
So now we're back to a white sparkling. Prosecco is obviously extraordinarily successful because it is really easy drinking. And I find it a little bit sweet. And personally, I would opt for a Cava made according to the traditional method with the secondary fermentation in the bottle over Prosecco. It's not that I have any kind of prejudice against a different type of method exactly. It's just that I find that flavor has driven me in that direction. And the flavor of Franciacorta, again, drives me right to it every single time. I think it's just a really elegant, I don't want to compare it to champagne because I believe that they should be all judged according to their own standards. But of course, it is in that direction, in that it's dry. The bubbles are really fine. The flavor is really elegant and perfect. And the Glera grape to me has a little bit of sweetness that I find a little less palatable than the grape mix that's being used for Franciacorta.
And Glera being the grape used for Prosecco. So, why is Franciacorta then more expensive? You're alluding to it, but are there some core things that they do making Franciacorta that do add cost to the process?
So, as I understand it, not all Prosecco is Charmat Method, but the vast majority of it is. So, there are some exceptions to that. Whereas with the Franciacorta, there is no Charmat being used whatsoever, as far as I understand. I haven't been everywhere. But I believe that's one of the features that you can qualify for the DOC is that you're making it in this sort of very specific way. So, just the time alone is a big deal. And then in addition, there's the risk, which is that a secondary fermentation in the bottle is not necessarily always going to go well. You can buy a riddling machine, of course, but some people are hand riddling all of the bottles, in certain cases. So I think that those are the reasons why it's a much more expensive wine. There was a Bella Vista here, I think, in the
Yes.
summer, and it was around $42, something in that neighborhood. I can't
Yes.
remember exactly. And again, you'd hate to just compare things to champagne because it's just really the wrong way to go.
Right.
But you could definitely tell people it was a champagne and they would be happy. And some people would say that it has a different flavor profile and expresses the terroir of the region in a much different way than champagne. Some people would probably like it much better.
Absolutely. So we don't get many of these wines, the Franciacorta, in our liquor stores across the country.
No, Italian sparkling wine, aside from Prosecco, is rare. This year, there were a few Lambruscos, which I was really happy to see, and I bought a lot of them. I think there's a Trento in the LCBO right now. And then there was a Franciacorta, at least one this summer. And other than that, it's private import.
Wow. Okay. We got to snap them up when we see them, at least if we want to try them. And so, do you think the food pairings would be any different? What would be your ideal pairing if you could choose anything for a Lambrusco, a modern style Lambrusco, and a Franciacorta?
I think that the Lambrusco is like extraordinarily food friendly because the acidity is really quite high.
Yeah.
So you could go anywhere from Christmas turkey to salumi, or, the antipasto with the heavy meats, the lardo and the salami and the nice hams, the prosciutto. It's perfect. I've had it with sausages on the barbecue. I mean, it's just such a good wine for food. And then the same holds true with any white sparkling, that it holds up against a lot of different things. But with a Franciacorta, I'd be more inclined to pair it with something like a fish, a smoked salmon, a ceviche. All of those things would work out, I think, really well.
That sounds great. I'm really intrigued. Now I want to go get a Labrusca. I mean, I just had that headache hangover from the perception of the 60s and 70s, and now I want to give it a try. So we're going to turn now to what is in your glass, Christine?
This is a Fino sherry.
Excellent. So you have written about that for the Globe and Mail. So sherry has again had this hangover image as, I don't know, a past generation's wine. What is happening now with sherry that is kind of giving it a revival?
It's really funny because I think what's interesting is that for the past 5 or 10 years, everyone has been saying sherry's been having a comeback because everybody's into the Spanish restaurants. I mean, you eat your tapas and you have a little glass of sherry with it. And cocktail bartenders are using sherry as a modifier in cocktails. But all the trend spotters should have phoned up the people in Jerez and told them that this was going on, because the sales were not reflecting that. They were not picking up at all. And in fact, sherry was still continuing to lose in sales every year. I wrote an article a few years back that I argued that the whiskey business was keeping sherry in business more than drinking sherry, because people wanted the barrels afterward to age their whiskey in. And then there was just finally, after all this time of saying it's back, it's back, it's back, the sherry sales kind of went up about a year and a half or 2 years ago.
And why was that? Like, what was the resurgence? I mean, it can't be just marketing. Was there a new style or something came through?
I can't say for sure, but it did seem to coincide with people getting really excited about the Anrama expressions. So
Anrama. What is that? Anrama.
I loved this so much when I tried this in Spain. I just loved it so much. It is a seasonal product. And essentially, they call it's a raw sherry. And Rama means like from the branch. That's the sort of idea. And I guess in some ways you could kind of link it to the natural and organic wine movement, because it's kind of similar. But what it is that when they're aging the sherry, there's a layer of yeast that they call flor that keeps certain sherries from getting over oxidized. So some sherries are oxidized and other sherries are not. After they filter all of the yeast out and then bottle it, and that's when you get a Fino or a Manzanilla, depending on, that's a regional distinction. The filtration of the yeast is the standard way that you would do that. And it's a little like if you think of a chill filtered whiskey, that people just don't want to run across a little bit of yeast bit in their wine. They want it all clean and clear. Apparently, when somebody was at Tio Pepe one day, they tasted out of the barrel, which means that the yeast is still there and it's still in the glass a little bit. And they said, this is better than the other expression. You should figure out a way to bottle this. And then they did. They've been doing that for a while, but it's only recently become more available outside of, it was in England and Spain at first, and now it's starting to come to North America.
So they're keeping that floor, that cap on there, and you can taste that yeasty. Is it a solid thing that you're actually sort of getting bits and chunks as you drink, or?
No, they still have to filter some of it out. It's not very meticulously filtered. So there's some yeast that's getting into your wine, a much higher percentage than there was before. What's interesting about it, I mean, and this is all really about kind of having been there and tried both and being like, okay, I really love the Tio Pepe Fino. This is great. But I really loved the Tio Pepe Fino on Roma. And, you just find yourself reaching for the one that draws you back over and over again. So anyhow, the idea is that the yeast dies in the glass and then it adds extra protein. And that protein gives it a sort of a more buttery kind of sensation. And it really has kind of umami pull for me that I can really taste like sort of a difference in the body and the flavor. And it's remarkable and it's addictive.
Oh, yes. Sign me up. So you said it was seasonal. Is it available now, or does it only certain seasons like spring this will come out?
It depends on the producer. I mean, I also have a manzanilla on Rama that you will see in the LCBO occasionally. I think it may be coming in very soon, something along these lines. The manzanillas, I find they tend to have a little bit of salt. So it's like salt and butter together. It's
Oh,
just delicious.
that
And
sounds perfect.
yeah, and they only do 2 releases per year of this one, I believe. And they only do 1 release per year of the Tio Pepe on Rama. But between all the different ones doing it, you should be able to find it year round.
Huh. I've got my shopping list for tomorrow. That just sounds so intriguing. I mean, I love the whole concept of umami, and I love wines that are unfiltered, that still have the stuffing in them. I mean,
Mhm.
the particulate, it adds to the taste, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, do you think this new raw style, natural style of sherry is going to save the sherry category, Christine?
The reason that I think it did is that if you look at the uptick in sales that the sherry industry finally experienced after all this time, the 2 categories were Fino and Manzanilla.
Hmm.
So it's not as though the Anrama is the only thing that people are drinking, but I think it drives people's interest in those 2 products. So you buy an Anrama, you fall in love with it. Maybe you don't have the Anrama next time, but you're like, hey, this is really good too.
That's
So it
great.
seems to be working a little. Yeah.
Absolutely. And what would you pair with it? What would be your favorite food pairings for an anrama, especially?
I think just the Spanish ham is the way to go with that.
Hmm.
The fino and the manzanilla, they're just perfect with that kind of salty meat.
All right, then. Wow. So let us move on to Pisco. We usually
Mhm.
focus on wine here, but you are cocktail and spirits writer as well. So I didn't want to miss the opportunity to talk about one of your favorite stories about Pisco. We know Pisco sour, or some of us do. So maybe slide us into Pisco gently here. What is a Pisco sour cocktail?
Oh, a pisco sour cocktail is, I think, maybe the best cocktail ever. I mean, it's just really solid and perfect every single time if it's made correctly. It's just lime, egg white, sugar, and pisco, and that's it. And you shake it over ice and you strain it, and then you add a little bit of Angostura bitters at the end. And if you do it right, it should have a really frothy top. You should feel sort of the dry tannins from the wine-based spirit, and in addition to it, this like punchy acidity. It's like I don't really like lemon meringue pie, but it's like what I wish lemon meringue pie tastes like. Or lime meringue pie. Yeah.
Good way to put it. Okay, so let's move back then. It's
Mm.
Pisco with an E, like we say Pisco?
Yeah, yeah. Pisco,
Okay.
exactly. Right.
So what is that like if we have it straight up or neat, or what is it? And how's it made? What does it taste like?
Have you ever had a grappa?
Yes.
Okay. Do you find it really harsh in or
Yes.
right? So I think that Pisco is like a much more easy drinking, friendlier, more approachable version of a grappa. And
Okay.
it's not made exactly the same way as a grappa. So that's one of the difference. But essentially, the basic principles of it, it's an unaged grape brandy or an unaged grape distillate. It's in the same family as a grappa.
Huh. And so what would be the flavors of a straight up Pisco? Like what would you be getting? Is it a floral flavor, a lime flavor? Like what are you getting out of this if you don't mix it in a cocktail?
It depends an awful lot on what type of grape is being used. So there are blended piscos, which tend to be the sort of pisco that you should really be reserving for cocktails. They're still quite high quality spirits, but they're not generally suitable for straight sipping. And then there's the puro piscos, and those are the pure ones. And basically, that just means single varietal. So it's the expression of one single grape. And within that category, there are, I know it sounds confusing, 2 different types. And one they call the puro. So the other one, I'm having trouble thinking of the name, but the other one is made from aromatic grapes.
Okay.
And so you can have a very straight grape brandy flavor, or you can have one that's much more aromatic and floral, depending on which varietal it is.
And why did you get fascinated with this story? Why did you choose to write about it in the Globe and Mail?
Probably because my dad grew up in Latin America, and because I used to go occasionally. We spent a lot of time in Central America and some in South America where he grew up. I've always felt kind of drawn to it. I don't know, maybe a lot of people feel like, maybe I should have been born there, where their parents came from. I really like that culture. I like the food. I like the drink. And so I went to Peru and I spent a fair bit of time there. And one of the things I did is I went to Ica, which is where they make a lot of Pisco. And then you learn this really interesting thing whenever you go to a place. It's a really kind of intellectually interesting spirit because they have to distill it to proof.
And what does that mean, to proof?
I can't remember the exact level, but you're not adding water after to change the way it tastes, right? You're bringing it up. You get really one shot to make this Pisco perfect.
Okay.
And then you're not aging it in wooden barrels. It is in aged like very sort of briefly in a tank, in a stainless steel tank, but by definition in Peru, no wood. And you think how many spirits get their flavors from wood?
Right.
And they get their caramel, they get their vanilla, they get their, and this is one where it's like, forget it. So this is a pure expression of a fermented and a distilled grape. If you buy a Puro, it's just one grape. There's no blending, and so it's really kind of an interesting exercise because they got to nail it.
Absolutely.
Then when you talk about terroir and spirits, sometimes it can be a little bit of a weird concept because you're reducing it to nothing and then turning it back into a liquid. But here you've got this spirit that really reflects the place where it was grown because you haven't added anything.
That's interesting. I don't write about spirits, so I'm probably mistaken in this, but the only thing I've heard about proof was like they would burn a candle or something, and if the flame burned so long, it was proof of how much alcohol was in the spirit. That was the origin. But proof, does it translate to like double or half of what the alcohol level is? So if a whiskey is 40%, then is proof 20 or 80, something like that? I think it's double, is it?
Yes, exactly. It's double.
Okay.
That's
It's
right.
double.
40%,
Okay.
80 proof. Exactly.
Just for us wine types who are not used to all this
Right.
proof and alcohol, just clarifying. All right. That is so cool. What grape do they use for the Pisco?
I seem to recall that there are 10 or 12 different ones that are used regularly. When I went, which is a while ago, there was a company called Pisco Portone, and they had one from each grape. And I believe that there were 12 different varietals, but one of them was a must. And one of them was a blend. So I think that's 10. I have a Cabranta here, which is from La Caravedo, which is in the LCBO right now. And this is actually the new incarnation of Portone, which is one of the places that I visited when I was there. And that's made from a Cabranta grape. And that is a non-aromatic grape. But then there are 9 other ways that it could happen. And I also have a Torrentel here, which is the same company. And that is a much more aromatic grape. They're also made from Muscat, Italia, and I think it's called Common Black. I'm sorry, I'm not good with all of the different grapes, but
That's okay. You're ahead of us. So would you drink this just as a cocktail, or would you actually enjoy Pisco like these single varietals with a meal? Would you pair them with food?
I'm not really a huge fan of pairing spirits with food except for cheese and chocolate.
Okay.
I always pick wine to go with a meal. Personally, I just think it works better. I mean, there are a few things that you might have. Appetizers or desserts tend to be where I would put a spirit. And this would go perfectly with a cheese plate.
All right. Wow. We've covered so much. Have we not covered anything that you would like to mention at this point?
I really, really have enjoyed the sort of more unusual, the off the beaten path things that I've tried. I love Europe. Obviously, Europe has some of the best wines in the world. But, I was in Puerto Vallarta recently, and I'm just like now obsessed with Mexican wine, and I want to know all about it. Like, that's actually the thing I want to find out the most about right now. I just think that emerging wine regions are so fascinating.
Yeah, and you're a great storyteller. Speaking of that, your book, it's available online and in bookstores. And what is the title?
America Walks Into a Bar.
Okay. And what's the subtitle?
It's a mouthful. It's a spirited history of taverns, saloons, speakeasies, and grog shops.
Awesome. That sounds great. Published by Oxford University Press. So it's available. It sounds like there are many great stories in that book, Christine. And you're working on a new book, if I understand correctly?
Yeah, I am. That's right.
All right. Well, Christine, where can people find you online? And we've already said where your book is available online or in retailers. Where can we find you online?
I'm at ChristineSismondo.com. I'm on Twitter at Sismondo. If you want to go to Instagram, I'm at Mondo Sismondo.
Awesome. Well, Christine, thank you so much for joining us here tonight. That was entirely delightful. I love the stories. I love discovering all of these. I'm motivated now. I've got a shopping list of things I want to try over the holidays, thanks to you. So thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, awesome. That's great. Cheers for now. We'll talk again in the future. Bye
Bye,
for now.
everyone.
Well, there you have it. Here are my takeaways from this terrific discussion with Christine. Number 1, it's interesting how much Lambrusco has changed compared to the 1980s, with more varieties and styles, including becoming drier and more refined as a sparkling wine. Given its red color, I think it makes a festive choice at this time of the year. Number 2, Franciacorta, the elegant Italian white sparkling wine that's made like champagne using the same grapes, is another must-try, but as Christine says, don't confuse it with champagne. And as she also recommends, it pairs beautifully with holiday turkey, as well as salumi, antipasto, cured hams, and prosciutto. Number 3, then there's sherry, the Spanish fortified wine making a comeback, especially with raw and natural versions tapping into the natural and organic wine movements, not to mention tapas themselves as a terrific pairing partner now that we're all into small plates. I'm intrigued to taste the buttery richness of those extra little bits of protein that the fleur cap imparts. And finally, number 4, Pisco sour cocktail with lime, egg, white sugar, and of course Pisco, the grape distilled spirit from Chile or Peru, sounds divine with its frothy top, dry tannins, and punchy acidity, as Christine describes it. It would be perfect on its own, or perhaps with a little hard cheese like Manchego. I'm thirsty and hungry now, are you? You will find links to Christine's website, her books, and social media handles in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/53. I've also posted a link to the video version of this interview. So what was your favorite tip or quote from the episode? Share that with me on Twitter or Facebook and tag me at Natalie MacLean. On Instagram, I'm at Natalie MacLean Wine. If you liked this episode, please tell a friend about it this week, especially one who would enjoy Christine's recommendations for these delicious, festive drinks. My podcast is easy to find, whether you search Google on its name, Unreserved Wine Talk, or on my name. Finally, if you want to take your ability to pair wine and food to the next level and avoid those 5 disastrous mistakes that can ruin your dinner, especially over the holidays, then join me in that free online video class at nataliemaclean.com/class. I can't wait to share more stories with you next week. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this one. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps some raw sherry or a Pisco cocktail or some Franciacorta while you're reading Mondo Cocktail or America Walks Into a Bar. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemaclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.